Hello, welcome to this week's episode of Risa's newsletter. Today we speak to one of the most influential figures in the crossover of healthcare innovation between Japan and the world. Over the last 3 decades, Rob Claar has founded and exited multiple healthcare businesses in Japan, EU, and the US, including Junicon, which developed Japan's first KOL database, and then Vorpal Technologies, which scored more than 50 new category medtech approvals since 2013. In this episode, we dive deeper into the healthcare startup landscape in Japan, as well as how Rob is currently fulfilling his own personal purpose of bringing healthcare innovation to Japan through his startup, HekaBio. The Japanese healthcare market is often viewed as an elusive black box. So if you're thinking about building, entering, investing, or even working in the Japanese healthcare innovation space, I think this episode is for you. Thank you so much again for being here and enjoy. Rob, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, we'll just get right into it. I think everyone knows Japan's healthcare system as a consumer, but few know about the greater problems of Japanese healthcare, such as drug loss. Could you explain the problem HekaBio is solving in the context of healthcare innovation in Japan?
Yes, that's a big question. Um, and it goes back to sort of when I first got to Japan. I was very fortunate to be hired at a think tank, which was writing white papers for the Ministry of Health back in the late 80s and early 90s. And forever ago. But I was very fortunate to be able to travel all over Japan, meet a lot of doctors one-on-one, and understand what's important to them, what's frustrating to them, what they wanted to solve. And I was so impressed with the seriousness and dedication that they have to patient care, their clinical practice. As well as the interest and excitement that they put on their publications and their desire to be up on the podium on the global stage talking about the latest and greatest innovations. And what I learned is that they really value their relationships with overseas doctors, German doctors, French doctors, American doctors, whoever it might be. And and they're slightly embarrassed that they're presenting on research based on one generation older technology. So I started to learn about this frustration early in my experience in Japan and early in my career, and kind of made it into personal mission, which then became part of the company mission. What we're trying to do is get more and more great worldwide innovations into Japan faster. So that's really our role. That's also the reason why in our business model, which we can talk about in whatever detail you like at some point, but we're really focused on how many of these great innovations we can identify around the world and make sure that they're a great fit for Japan. And how can we accelerate them into Japan by getting the clinical studies done, getting the regulatory process done, getting them launched in the market. And then really in some way, our role is done once we get them into the market. That's really our mission. That's our specialty. That's the role that we play in Japanese society. But there's also a business aspect to what we do. And so we do want to remain involved in the commercial aspect on an ongoing basis. However, we don't want to get bogged down in, for example, hiring, hundreds of salespeople in order to service various call points. We would rather leave the sales portion up to people who already have a ready-made, built-in infrastructure. And then we get back into our mission, which is bringing those great innovations in. So, one of the points is, and I think many people know this, but Japan is really reliant on overseas innovations for a great percentage, more than half, yeah, for innovations that are coming in. That's true for drugs, devices, diagnostic products, etc. Within that context, solving the innovation lag in Japan really does require that a number of people, and it's not only us, of course, but that people who can should focus on the identification and acceleration of those great innovations into Japan. So we play one part of that, and we have our role within that context. And like you mentioned, people do talk about the drug lag and the drug loss. In some ways, we get involved a little bit earlier than that because drug lag, drug loss, device, the same thing, really refers to products that are already approved and commercially available in major markets around the world. So, but to be honest, we're actually getting involved a little bit earlier. So we like to get involved before there's a lag or a loss, and we would hope to actually accelerate those programs into Japan in some cases faster than they get their approval in the U.S. So we're trying to jump the gun at least by a year, in some cases a year and a half, on what this when recognizing a common problem of the lag and loss. We like to get involved a little bit earlier in that. It also helps us to get very favorable in licensing deal terms for ourselves because if we have the courage and the confidence in the science to jump in earlier than other companies would be willing to do, then we can get ourselves much better deal terms than would be commonly available.
That's honestly incredible. I remember you telling me about this, and I was like, wow, this is such a new and innovative way to approach this issue because you guys are really stepping in before the lag and loss really takes place. You're kind of, stepping in before the problem even arises in a way.
Mm.
And I just want to probe a little bit more as to kind of your reasoning or like how you understand the drug loss problem. Why is it the case that more than half come from overseas? Why is that kind of the status quo and the reality for Japan?
That's a big question. I think, you go back a couple of decades and you'll see that Japan had originated almost as many new drug approvals as the US had
Mm.
at some point, and at some point that really switched.
Hmm.
Um, I think it gets down to so I should say that I don't know the full answer, by the way.
Hmm.
Some parts of it may be that more and more innovation is being done by smaller and smaller companies, I find. And this is
Mm.
true in, biotech and in devices as well. And so the larger companies end up being primarily brand houses that are, buying those companies or licensing from those companies.
Hmm.
So that brings up a couple things. Number one is that those small companies, they Japan is very far away, difficult to understand, opaque. They may or may not have any experience or have ever visited but also small companies really have to stick to what they're doing, right? You
Hmm.
can't get distracted from your mission. So if their mission is to get complete phase two in the US, that's going to be
Hmm.
all that they have the bandwidth to do. So it actually takes some convincing to get those companies to focus on Japan,
Mm.
which is part of what we do. But I don't want to get off on that tangent just yet because I want to get back to your question. But I think when you see smaller and smaller companies around the world doing the innovation, now you see that those companies are really focused on the U.S. market because of pricing, because of other issues,
Mm.
and because the innovation ecosystem is so robust in the U.S. So many
Mm.
people, the talent pools are very, very fluid, so that um, people who didn't consider themselves to be entrepreneurs and perhaps don't have that mindset are very willing to jump into a startup.
Mm.
And in Japan, that's much harder to convince people to do, right? As you know. So I think there's some mindset issues. The whole, where does innovation happen? And where are those bio ventures doing the real innovation? It's been harder. It's taken much longer for Japan to get up to speed in developing that ecosystem. I
Mm.
think a lot of steps are happening as we speak, but Japan has a lot of catching up to do in terms of the number of products that do get through to that stage of development. But
Mm,
the other part of your question, why are some of those products not coming into Japan?
mm,
Honestly, the worldwide blockbuster drugs, they are getting into Japan. So Japan is not, suffering from lack of access to these huge blockbuster necessary drugs, et cetera. So it may take longer. There may be a lag of, in some cases 3 years, in some cases 5 years, but these things are coming in general. So those drugs that are owned by large big pharma,
mm,
they are gonna make it to Japan. In some
mhm,
cases, the company will make business decisions based on available pricing, et cetera, where they'll deprioritize a Japan entry for a particular product. But in most cases, that's not the cause of lag and loss. What
mhm,
is smaller companies that are focusing on orphan drug development
mm,
or pediatric indications, these things that have where the economics are harder for mega pharma to get behind. So those 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 companies they don't have the in-house bandwidth to think about Japan. If they could get a good licensing deal done, they probably would, and
mm,
those would come in. But what we're seeing in Japan is a lot of the big pharma are less and less interested in doing Japan-only deals, and the medium pharma may not have the bandwidth to do large enough licensing deals that make it worthwhile for the U.S. or elsewhere startup
mm,
to do that deal. So I think these are some of the issues, and the government is doing some things to try to encourage and offer grant opportunities for companies that'll raise their hand to take on a particular orphan or pediatric drug to bring in. So I think that's really great. I think the
mm,
government's making a lot of good effort in that area.
mm, mm.
But your specific question was, why is Japan reliant on the outside for bringing innovation in? Why can't it sort of happen here? And I think so. My answer is that um, to the degree that I understand fully, which I don't, but to as much as I do, I think it gets down to the entrepreneurship, the innovation ecosystem, and
Mm,
how much that's producing.
mm,
And the output of the innovation ecosystem is so skewed toward the US right now
mm,
that it's going to take a while for catch up to happen.
mhm.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So
Well,
that's definitely a much longer process to try to cure that one.
yeah, no, definitely. We'll
Yeah.
definitely dig a bit deeper into that area of the
Yeah.
topic a bit later, but I'll move on to the next question right now, which is HekaBio has partnered with a great variety of innovative startups, including Alpha Tau's Alpha Dart for solid tumor treatment, which we can get into later. But
Yeah.
I think the really big question is what's in it for them? What benefit does it bring to these startups to expand into Japan?
Mm. Yeah. So, and particularly, that's right. So, particularly because we get them at a fairly early stage, and we need to convince them that they want to be in Japan. It's going to be worth their while to get an approval in Japan, and it's going to be it's going to increase their company value.
Mm,
So, what we try to do there is we lean on the network that we've developed, and not only since the establishment of HekaBio, and we're coming up here on our let's see, 2000, yeah, coming up on our ninth birthday, I guess. Is that right? Yeah. Uh, so yeah, it's been about that long. But yeah, 2000, no, eighth birthday.
mm.
Eighth birthday in November. Yes. Okay. So um so I just lost my track of my train of thought. What was your question, Henry? Sorry
Oh,
about that.
All good, all good. It happens to me all the time. But I think you've probably like dealt with this question a lot, which is, when you talk to these startups, they're probably thinking like, why should I go into Japan? I'm already, I don't have enough resources. Why should I expend so much my limited resources into coming into Japan?
Exactly. Okay, great. Thanks. Now I remember. Okay. So, um, it's a good question. So um, before establishing HekaBio, and I've been in healthcare ever since late 80s and until now. So it's I guess 3.5 decades by now. So there's me and other people in the management team and the broader team really have great networks that span the world. And so I think there's a lot of people out there who think of, even if they don't think it's time for them to start thinking about Japan, they think, Japan might pop into their head and they might give us a call. So we get
Mm,
a lot of that. We got a lot of like sort of inbound inquiries from
mm,
people that we know or people who know us who have introduced us to someone else. So a lot of times there's people out there who have convinced startups that, hey, you should be thinking about Japan and call these guys. Now,
mm,
so we feel really, really privileged by that,
mm,
uh, and we're really grateful for it. And particularly when we had Vorpal Technologies, which was a, a CRO focused on medical devices. And for the decade of running Vorpal Technologies, we were able to get 49 approvals. So and most of those were US companies. So a lot of US private companies that were on their way to US approval. So typically before approval, and they were just getting ramped up, or maybe they just got approval in the US, just getting ramped up. They had just enough bandwidth to start thinking about Japan. And we were able to show over time that we could build significant company value by getting them a free and clear approval in Japan. So, of
mm,
course, as a CRO, they're paying us month by month
mm,
to do that consulting work to get them do the clinical trials, do in the event that they're required, but many times they're not for devices, and then get them through the regulatory process, get them reimbursement price listing, uh,
mm,
and then continue by being their designated marketing authorization holder
mm,
over time. So that's a little bit of an esoteric term, but the DMAH system enables overseas companies to own and control their regulatory approval without needing to set up an office in Japan.
mm,
So you don't have to do anything from overseas. You can use this special rule in the Japan pharmaceutical law
mm,
that enables you to use an appointed affiliate in Japan who can do that. And so in doing that for many great companies that were private at the time and had strategic IPOs, had IPOs or strategic M&A
mm,
success during the period of a project when we were working with them. We asked all those companies, how much do you think having a free and clear Japan approval uh, built on your company valuation at your time of exit? So
mm,
very simple one question. And of course, nobody's going to tell us exactly what that number is, but I'm sure that it came up as they're negotiating with the likes of Medtronic or Boston Scientific.
mm,
But the range of answers that we got was somewhere between 5 and 10%.
mm,
So we believe that having that Japan approval can really significantly improve the value of a startup company. And so
mm,
giving them some reason to start thinking about Japan is really what we consider our goal. And we're in some ways we're also sort of operating on behalf of uh, our friends, the doctors, who we know want the next generation of great innovations coming in quickly. So we really need to be out there selling the Japan story. Uh,
mm,
and so we're not an agent of the government. We're not part of JETRO or something like that, but we really consider it our role to advocate on behalf of the Japanese healthcare system, Japanese society, the doctors and patients in order to bring companies in. And fortunately, we do have this experience in having built up a lot of value on
Mm,
behalf of companies coming in. So
mm,
we can call out that track record and say, hey, wouldn't you be interested in building this amount of company value
mm,
um, just by having Japan approval? And there are a couple other things that we offer when we reach out to or they reach out to us when we get into discussions about what a commercial relationship will look like. What we want to do is we want to be involved in the commercial the ongoing commercial upside
mm, mm,
to some degree, and we want to accelerate those into Japan using
mm,
the expert team that we have, and we want to help build company value. And a way that we can convince companies that we will be on their side at every turn is and also helps us to convince them to pay a little bit of attention to Japan if that wasn't the first thing on their mind,
mm,
is we make minority investments into the company. So we're going to make a small investment into you. That gives you enough money to um, you know, to pay for the distraction of that Japan might be. Of course, leaving your regulatory process in somebody else's hands is not a completely hands-off process, right?
mm,
It does take some internal resources, and we understand that. We know that people need to have a reason to focus on it.
mm,
So that's what does that. And also, the our investment will cover any costs that they may incur in going forward to get that approval. So um,
mm,
we we come to them with a couple of different reasons why there's value in partnering with us
mm,
and coming
mm,
in. So we use the Japan story itself, and then we use the unique aspects of our partnering model
mm.
as the second aspect of that.
Definitely. And I think what you guys doing and the approach that you guys are taking is actually very unique. Compared to just like a regular like GTM agency or an advisory or anything. But going back to your point about the Japan story, and how much of the value of the startup increases just by having that Japanese approval, that comes from the assumption that getting Japanese approval is difficult, right? And therefore, if they can be approved by Japanese authorities and therefore it's also safe or effective enough to expand into other markets. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's another part of it. Sure. So exactly. I think, un- the first part of what you said is historically what's been true, which is that Japan's a big market. It's the third largest market in the world, third largest single country market in the world. So
Hmm.
having approval there is going to be worth something.
Hmm.
That's the number one. And then what you mentioned is something that really didn't occur to us until much later, but it's also very true, which is and gaining in importance,
Hmm.
which is once you've got Japan approval, you've made you've done the heavy lift to get approval in one of the most stringent companies and countries around the world. Now, why not use the advantages that you have in countries that consider Japanese approval to be a predicate, where you
Hmm.
have a leg up on their regulatory approval process? We might as well be making uh, taking advantage of having done that effort. So that goes for us for sure, but it also goes for the originator companies where they realize that hey, we have approval in Japan. That means also a stepping stone to the rest of Asia. And when
Hmm.
we got started, the roles were very different, where a lot of companies were considering China only,
Hmm.
or China as for sure China to be the best stepping stone into Asia.
Hmm.
Uh, Political and other economic uh, circumstances have changed so that now Japan is looking like a more reliable or safer stepping stone into the rest of Asia. And meanwhile, we have such high growth in certain areas of Southeast Asia, particularly that make the Japan approval and that stepping stone strategy even more attractive.
Hmm. Definitely. It's a trend that we also hear in like the general innovation and startup space as well. I'm sure you've
Yeah.
heard some of this as well. But Thank you. I'll move on to the next questions for now. With more than 2 decades in the Japanese healthcare space and a successful run co-founding Vorpal and Junicon as well, I'd be curious to hear how you've seen the landscape shift. How has the government's, or more so maybe the PDA's, perspective shifted on foreign-owned or foreign-developed treatments?
Yeah. So PMDA, in my perspective, PMDA has always been very open to foreign developed
Mm,
innovations. And they've also, even this goes way back, but even let's see, at the beginning, call it 15 years ago or even 20 years ago. And the first time when I got in front of the PMDA, and I remember the particular leaders of that group, et cetera. And what I realized is that the PMDA it's almost like we're bringing to them a story, almost like a tutorial of what's available out there in the world in
mm,
particularly med tech innovation, which they felt that they had less access to.
mm,
And so we were shown a lot of favoritism, I would say, in terms of getting early meetings with the PMDA and
eh,
getting good teams assigned to us when we were working with Vorpal because we had, things were coming in much, much quicker than they were used to. And
mm,
the medical societies and the key doctors were super engaged. They had situations where PMDA and FDA were collaborating simultaneously on particular projects
mhm,
in order to get simultaneous approval, which we participated in. And so this whole trend was kind of a bonanza that really gave us a lot of favoritism, and favoritism is not the right word, a lot receptivity, I would say,
mm,
from the PMDA. They were always happy to see us and say, "Wow, this is so cool! This new innovation coming." um,
mhm,
it was a very good time to be running a device-based CRO in Japan,
mm,
and that. So we never saw um, you know blockage of foreign derived uh, projects. The exception to that rule, though, is, as you know, with the national health insurance system,
mm,
with the fully reimbursed model that we have in Japan, which is, you can't argue with the results that Japanese healthcare brings, right? With the
mm,
healthiest, the highest healthy longevity and overall longevity in the world. It's a tremendous success model.
mm,
Uh, but within that, um, the the innovations that they want to bring, um, they also, so one argument would be that, okay, Japan's doing great already. Why does it need more innovation? Uh,
mm,
and that's really not the perspective, because innovation is changing
mhm,
constantly. Doctors and patients and patient awareness of great innovations is also growing. So there's also a pull aspect from the patients as well. But we see that you know the within that, yes, innovations from around the world and in Japan are super um, welcomed. The
mm,
difference that we see, or the exception to that rule, is when within the national health insurance system, um, particularly as the society ages and as working population decline kick in, and over the next decade, it's really going to be the key time of seeing how we can enable the national health insurance system to survive and not collapse under its own weight.
mm,
Uh, but within that, for one thing's for sure, is that Japan doesn't Japan is less willing to reward with a huge price premium an innovation that comes from anybody,
mhm,
and less so if it's coming from overseas, because they want to, and this is really important because the government, from the PMDA to the PMDA is supposed to be a science only based organization, but they also get involved in awareness of pricing, and they ask about pricing even in the regulatory process nowadays.
Hmm.
Um, but but particularly the MHLW and the medical societies want to make sure that they're not supporting a company that's greedy.
Mm,
So they want to look people in the eye. They want to look at the founders and the CEOs of those companies, and they want to make sure that, okay, we're putting our reputations on the line here to get
mm,
your innovation in.
hmm.
Are you a person that we can trust for the long term?
Hmm.
And this is really the attitude. And I've seen situations where overseas companies have really blown it in terms of building those relationships and
Mm,
have been slapped on the wrist in terms of their reimbursement. Now
hmm.
that's that's a story that I can't tell in too much detail, of course. There's definitely that, but it's also, when we were running the Vorpal Technologies, which is a consultancy. In some ways, consultancies, and your company is also a consultancy, but so but consultancies can't always pick their clients all
Mm,
the time, but actually they should, because if you are trying to advocate on behalf of a really greedy client, that can
mm,
destroy your reputation. But what
mm,
happens in Japan if your reputation gets destroyed? Then you can't move.
mm,
So that's not it's not worth jeopardizing your reputation for anybody for any
mm,
reason. So we definitely needed to adjust expectations and so forth in certain cases when we were working at running the CRO.
mm,
Um,
mm,
and nowadays, I mean, we're not a consultancy, so we're, in our partnerships, we want to make sure that we always partner with the management team and the great
mm,
technology for sure. But the management team, we want to make sure that we know and understand and like them and trust them. And we also want to make sure that the Japanese key opinion leaders also know, understand, and like them and trust them
mm,
as well,
mhm,
because that really, those relationships are what is going to drive success in Japan, not only on the regulatory side, but when you get down to writing your treatment guidelines, when you get to advocating for pricing,
mm,
all that is really going to be driven by those trust relationships that you have with the key doctors.
mm, mm,
So I would say, as foreigners, we need to be particularly sensitive that we're
mm,
behaving the right way, and we need to also, uh, you know, make sure that in our hearts we are also motivated by making sure that the Japanese national health insurance system does continue
mm,
and continue to provide, great results
mhm,
for Japan. So
definitely.
it's in nobody's best interest um, to take a larger part of the pie than they should.
Mm, mm, definitely.
Yeah.
You've kind of spoken about the past and current mindset and attitude of the PMDAs, but I would also like to kind of ask and understand a bit more how you expect the landscape to shift in the coming 5 to 10 years. You kind of mentioned the attitude towards the reimbursement and the coverage because of the aging population and the burden on the NHI. But is there anything or any trends we should keep an eye out for in the coming, decade or so?
Um, yes, I'm not sure, but you probably know that over the last say 2 decades, there's been I think a quadrupling of people working at the PMDA, which is great.
Mm,
But I think I sense that they're also still overworked and underpopulated or understaffed. So
mm,
I think, I read recently that they're thinking of they're asking for additional budget in order to increase staff
mm,
at the PMDA. I think that's a good thing to help to speed up some of the regulatory approvals. Um, Japan, the politicians and the ministry have done a wonderful job in helping to deregulate things. So
mm,
as you know, no longer requiring a repeat of phase one studies in pharmaceuticals. In some cases, even later studies can be avoided.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I just saw last week that Japan is considering allowing um, submissions to go in English, and that would save an enormous amount of time and expense
Mm-hmm.
on on translation of regulatory documents. So that's an amazing something I never thought we'd see happen. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so things like this, I think Japan is very serious about um, tackling the drug lag and loss issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, but the key question that probably you have and everybody else does is what's going to happen with national health insurance and the pricing? Because, systemic improvements to adding the number of people to the PMDA, becoming more and more um, transparent. PMDA setting up overseas offices to tell people about how good Japan is.
Mm-hmm.
These are all great things. Very, very good progress. But when it gets down to it, people look, and 20 years ago, Japan used to have much higher pricing than the US. Now it's much less. So um, we look at that and we understand that there's going to be an economic decision process as well. And Japanese companies are putting less effort into the Japanese market too. And so this is really something that should be a big warning sign to
Mm-hmm.
the government, and I think it is. But there needs to be more. But on the same hand, we see that okay, the um, the device market is growing at some you know low to moderate single digit percent. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's the overall pharmaceutical market is basically flat. But within that, the considered innovative products that are still on patent are growing at nearly 10%. So that
Mm-hmm.
sounds great. Um, but in some ways, that sounds great. So I think that's where Japan wants to be, ideally.
Mm-hmm.
That good enough to encourage more of these startup companies or bringing in more of these drugs that are in on the loss and lag list. Is that going to be sufficient to bring them in? Because I think on a drug by drug basis, Japan is going to need to take a hard look at what the economics are. And I think
Right.
right now, my perspective is that the people in who make pricing decisions are very focused on single year or short term budget impact rather than
Mm-hmm.
uh, what's the true long term health economic story. So,
Mm-hmm.
and part of this, and I may not be right about this, but I think that if the government people working in a particular section. And
Mm-hmm.
I know Japan has the policy of switching people out every couple of years. So, and that helps to avoid other problems that could come up. And it's the same reason why your bankers will change every 2 years because they don't want you to have too cozy a relationship, I guess, with different people who are in a position to change and alter your outcome.
Mm-hmm.
But within that, um, I would think, if I were in a position, if I were working in the MHLW, in the Economics Bureau,
Mm-hmm.
and I know I'm only going to be there for 2 years, so I'm going to switch out to something else, then you're not going to want to put your career on the line by approving or advocating for a very expensive treatment. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
even though there may be really good data that show that, okay, approving it at this level is going to save overall money for the national healthcare system over the next 5 years. But in 5 years, you're not going to be there. So I think the personnel, the HR system of the MHLW may be encouraging short-term thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It's my guess. But I think, I do sense that people are much more sensitive to um, short-term budget impact rather than true health economic outcome.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Um,
So that issue really needs to be solved because, government grants and, encouragement and deregulation,
mm,
all these are really good, but something does have to happen with the pricing
mm,
to enable that. And so I don't know. Actually, I want to see what your perspective is on this one too. But you hear a lot of people talking about more and more private pay, or
mm,
what's could there be an increasing role for private insurance
mm,
rather than national health insurance, or in addition to national health insurance, so that we know that there's a certain number of high cost treatments, and maybe the government can't afford to enable everyone to get access to those. So,
mm, mm,
in some ways, this is a big disappointment because Japan wants to maintain its socialistic system. But if it's not affordable, then other solutions need to be in there because you also have to guarantee
mm,
to the innovator companies that are developing the new solutions, that they're going to be rewarded for their innovation.
mm, mm.
And if they feel that, well, in Japan we're just going to get squeezed, then you have further exacerbation of the lag and loss issue.
Definitely. Yeah, that's for sure. And I guess like a lot of startups also have to really think about this issue as well when their budget is already so tight, right? They can't afford to spend as much as big companies either on, going through this entire process of getting approval as well.
Mhm.
But I was looking through kind of like your partnerships and the companies that you help, license in Japan, but from Alpha Tau's cancer treatment to Limaka's biopsies to therapeutics, I've noticed that a lot of the startups that you partnered with are actually from Israel.
Mhm.
Can you explain a bit more as to why this is?
Yeah, so I've always liked traveling to Israel, and I have a lot of friends there. And Israel is, they call themselves the startup nation,
Mm,
and so much innovation going on there. It's such a buzz. I mean, we live in Tokyo, right, which is a pretty calm environment. But for example, you go to somewhere in Silicon Valley, and the amount of deals that are getting done and the buzz around establishing new businesses, et cetera, that could be going on at a particular coffee shop somewhere is
hmm
really something that you sense when you're there. And it's probably 5 times more so when you go to Israel. So that, probably on every neighborhood block, there's a Nobel laureate, and someone who's had a successful startup, and
hmm
it's really just a dense population of amazingly successful entrepreneurs with a mindset of urgency that
hmm
really encourages that new company creation and uh, technology development. So we think there's a great match there because, compared to Japan is specifically not as good at doing that early innovation as we
hmm
know. So that's one thing that is an interesting match, I feel. And also but also, Japan is a really good match for Israeli companies because um, Israeli companies are, in the medtech area anyway, are um, not really positioning themselves to do um, scale up manufacturing. Um,
mm
and so they're doing, more prototype level, or using third-party development companies, et cetera. When they get to scale up development, my idea, and we haven't done this yet, but what I think is a great partnership model is actually connecting them with Japanese precision manufacturers that could do that scale up manufacturing. I think that's a future dream that we would like to help create as well.
mm Definitely, because you're kind of leveraging the strength of Japan that everyone
Yeah.
knows. So. That would
Yeah.
be a very interesting, and you could replicate that process a bunch of times as well, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, we hope we can. But when I first went to Israel, it was just for vacation, and I was going for personal interest and spiritual interest, and just trying to see as many amazing spots as I could. And I made some friends during that, just by chance, made some friends during that trip, and then the phone started ringing, and people who had ideas for, hey, what about this in Japan? Do you think this would work? And most of it didn't come to anything except for one day the phone rang from the new CEO of Alpha Tau, and that really, that phone call changed the trajectory of HekaBio by a significant measure. Because taking on that project and having you know, it took a lot of faith to take that one on because it was not so well proven yet.
Mm,
But we were able to look at their human data, their clinical data. We were able to bring their management team into Japan um, twice within 6 months and meet with all the different key opinion leader doctors. And, we convinced ourselves that we like and we trust the team. And the key doctors in Japan also did as well. So everybody became um, very much supportive of bringing that project in and getting it accelerated. So it was a really good decision for us to partner with Alpha Tau.
mm,
And
mm,
after that, through their network and through other networks that are adjacent to the Alpha Tau team and others that I had met in Israel, it's sort of grown on its own.
mm,
So now we get calls from VC funds, from law firms, from startups. Yeah, so there's a lot of sort of deal flow that comes to us from Israel. We're grateful for
mm, mm. Definitely. Even like just online, HekaBio and Alpha Tau are so closely linked, like your names. So I'm sure
that.
that a lot of people were saw that as an example as well and saw that it probably applied to their own business and therefore might have reached out as well.
Yeah.
Definitely. One final question before the lightning round. You've screened a variety of overseas startups in all corners of healthcare, and now you're also mentoring Japanese startups at the Techstars Accelerator. What
Mhm.
do you hope to see more of among Japanese startups in the healthcare space?
Yeah. So I do see a lot more Japanese people getting into, willing to jump into startups. This is great. So I
Mm,
really think the Japanese startup ecosystem is going to take off.
mm,
Um, and what I hope I can help them with is sort of a global perspective on what's being developed, what's being thought about, what the real needs are in the market, so that to help make sure that they're going in the direction of not being too Japan centric in their own development, and they're really building themselves up for success. I mean, I think a Japan startup should focus on Japan doctor relationships and getting early stages of their development and their product concept together. But they should also quickly also turn to other global markets, particularly the US, in order to get some clinical work done there.
mm,
That will build up their value and their traction by a lot. So um, I think, in general, what Japan needs to avoid is too many too many companies going after the same thing.
mm,
Um, and I think Japan, unfortunately, when you look back at other industries, you do see kind of a strong move when there's a trend in one direction. There's government focus, and then there's also company focus on all going in the same direction.
mm,
And so I would like to, or I would hope that Japan can create a lot of startups that are working on very diverse areas. Um, and one I'm not sure what the answer is, but Japan does have specific rules and laws around privacy. It's good to keep those. I mean, those can translate to any country around the world. That's true.
Mm,
Um, but Japan, if you're a Japanese startup, it also helps you to understand what the regulatory and reimbursement landscape is going to look like outside of Japan. So particularly in the US.
mm,
And it may help you to, your development may change based on if you're thinking only about the Japan market or versus the global market. So
mm,
I think that's an important thing. Or, there was one unfortunate situation that I observed not recently, but a couple years ago, where um, there was a company that had gotten into kind of already a red ocean, but from their
mm,
perspective, sitting in Japan, they thought they're the only ones doing it.
mm,
Um, and it turned out that they really didn't have much of a competitive advantage to some of their overseas peers that were moving faster than they were. So this is something that you would hope that Japanese companies can avoid.
mm, mm. Definitely. Yeah, it depends on like the goal that you're setting for yourself, and the
Yeah,
development process and what you're aiming for will definitely shift depending on like which direction you're going. But thank you
yeah.
so much for that insight. And now on to the final speed lightning round of questions. The first one is, if you were banned from Japan forever, what is one thing that you'd bring back from your last trip to Japan?
Yeah, so that's a really tough question. So when I heard that, I started getting very fearful because I'm not a fearful guy, but J Japan is being present in and being able to visit, particularly the mountains and rivers, waterfalls, Shinto shrines in those very
Mm.
sacred places throughout Japan is my hobby and something that's really important to me. So if I were unable to get to those, it would be quite detrimental. So I have to make sure I behave well enough that I don't get and so with that, I think probably it would just be pictures of those amazing power spots that would
Mm.
help bring back the memories of being there.
Definitely. Yeah. The countryside and the rural side of Japan is really beautiful.
Yeah.
The second question is, what is a book that you would recommend?
So I probably a book that changed my life, a couple, but one is The Pilgrimage by Paulo Coelho. I love that
Mm,
book. It's about self-discovery and magic and spirituality, all
hmm
very important things. And another one is a little bit more esoteric, but there's an author called Graham Hancock who wrote a number of books, but one that I really like, it changed my life reading this, is called Fingerprints of the Gods. And he is some people love him, some people hate him, but they call him a pseudoscientist. But what he does is he goes around the world and examines archaeological sites, ancient archaeological sites, and argues for there's no way that this could have been developed at the
mm,
in the time frame that common current scientists say that it could have been developed. So he's arguing for a much older beginning of humanity and society, and he
mm,
believes that there was a complete wiping out of a past civilization um, around 10, 12,000 years ago.
mm,
And so it's really interesting. My conclusion from all that is that it's what it's eye-opening for me because there may be so much more, or I would say that there is so much more about our world and the
mm,
universe that we just don't understand. So it keeps me very curious and interested in visiting places, not only in Japan but around the world, and experiencing the energy of that place and the people
mm, mm,
and just keeping my eyes open for new realities because
mm,
I think that what we understand today to be the reality of the world is not the full answer.
mm, mm, mm. That's definitely a very unique storyline that I've never, or like the context of a book that I've never heard before. I'm definitely going to pick it up. I've never heard anything like it.
Yeah.
The final question is, what do you do when you need a push of courage?
So I'm a big meditation practitioner, and so I think that all the different aspects or superpowers that one needs is all within, and so
Mm.
this going deep within and finding that courage and confidence is the way to do that. So connecting to that.
All right. Thank you, Rob, so much for sharing your story. It really is inspiring how much you've dedicated your life and your career to driving healthcare innovation in Japan. Just final quick questions. But how do people reach out to you? Is LinkedIn kind of your way to
Yeah,
go?
LinkedIn is really good. Yeah, I'm on there a lot, so that'd be
Okay,
good.
perfect. And how can the audience be helpful to you?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions from entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, and also any healthcare companies that have questions about Japan or about our business or about meditation and what magical mountain Shinto shrines in Japan. I'm happy to talk.
Perfect. Thank
Yeah.
you, Rob, so much again. And that's it for today's podcast. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Lisa.